Hello, welcome to Appreciating Drama. So, for the past few weeks, we had been observing or watching closely the evolution of drama, and in fact, we have reached Shakespeare, and let's see today what are the events that happen in the world of drama after Shakespeare. So today we are going to see restoration drama. So the period from 1660 to 1700 is known as the Restoration period or the age of Dryden. Dryden was the representative writer of this period. The restoration of King Charles II in 1660 marks the beginning of a new era both in the life and the literature of England. So the name for this kind of drama is derived from the restoration of the King Charles II. Here restoration means actually he was the king of only Scotland first. Those days, there were three kingdoms: Scotland, Ireland and England. But in 1660 only he became the king of whole of England, including Scotland, Ireland and also England. That is the meaning of restoration of King Charles II. So this is a pic of King Charles II. The theatres which were closed in 1642 were opened during the Restoration. So there is a great development as far as drama is concerned. So drama is given a new lease of life in 1642. They became the writer's haunt of the upper classes. Here upper classes means the aristocrats or the elitist people. People who belong to the high class, like the nobles, the king, queen, the courtiers and all that. So these people started coming to the theatre and enjoying the fun. That's the meaning of writer's haunt. Consequently, the plays written for the playhouses were distinctly calculated by the authors to appeal to a courtly and cavalier audience. So naturally the playwrights started writing dramas for this elite or aristocrat family or members, just to please them, because ultimately their success depends on the audience and their response. So they wanted to please these people. It is this that explains the rise of the heroic tragedy and the development of the comedy of manners. So we have two different types of dramas developing at this period of time. They are heroic tragedy and also comedy of manners. The heroic tragedy appealed to artificial aristocratic sentiments on the subject of honor. So the word honor is a big word. It has a lot of connotations. I think if you watch some of the old movies where you have knights and all that fighting, so the theme of such kind of movies are actually honor. And you find in Julius Caesar, during the speech of Mark Antony, he uses the word, he is an honorable man. So this word honor had a lot of meaning at that time. So honor means you are a man of your word, you are valiant. Valor was another term, courage. So if you are a man, you should keep your word, you should fight for the country and you should help people in need. There's another word is called chivalry, CHIVALRY. All these words were related. So the subject of this heroic tragedy was definitely honor. And the Restoration comedy of manners reflected the morally vicious but intellectually brilliant atmosphere of the saloons and the chocolate houses. So during those days we had something called saloons. Saloons are actually places where women and men both of high social status would come together and have a kind of social gathering. Such places were called saloons, almost like the clubs of today, maybe like a Rotary Club or Lions Club and all that. And of course you have chocolate houses. It was during that time chocolate was almost like invented for the first time. So it became a fashion, especially among the aristocrats. So just like the coffee houses of today or even the cafes, these chocolate houses started springing up everywhere, and they also became a haunting place for these aristocrats. So drinking chocolate was almost like drinking wine those days. So there again we have these high class people coming there. The Restoration tragedy is also known as the heroic tragedy. So another name for Restoration tragedy is heroic tragedy. The influence of French romance and drama produced its first important result in the form of the heroic play or heroic tragedy. So this particular drama was mostly influenced by French writers. France and England were very close. They are almost neighbors, and their cultures are always interconnected. So you find the English literature is greatly influenced by the French literature and French writers, of course. So if you find lots of words from French creeping into English language, which makes it all the more difficult for people like us to pronounce. The Restoration tragedy is artificial, means not realistic. Its emotions are unreal. It mainly deals with conflict between love and honor. So there is a conflict between love and honor. That means man loves a girl, but there is a kind of obstacle coming in between. So he fights for, he has to fight either for love or for honor or for both. So you find this conflict coming between love and honor. John Dryden was the principal writer of the heroic tragedy. So the main writer of that time was John Dryden. His famous tragedies are Tyrannic Love, Conquest of Granada, and All for Love. So these are the famous tragedies of John Dryden. And we have a pic of John Dryden here, another great writer after Shakespeare and all that. In Dryden's heroic plays, we find a hero of superhuman powers and with superhuman ideals. So the hero was, rather exaggerated. He had superhuman ideals and all that. Ideas means values or principles. There is a heroine of unsurpassed beauty and constancy. So the heroine is always really gorgeous, and she is always constant. Constant means faithful. There is an inner conflict in the minds of several characters between love and honor, that we have already seen. And there is a striving story of fighting and martial enthusiasm filled with intense dramatic interest. So maybe there is a kind of love triangle, one girl fighting for two. So there will be kind of duel, fight between the two people. That's the meaning of martial enthusiasm, physical fight, martial arts and all that. But those days it was kind of duel or fight between the two people with using sword or spear. All for Love is the finest tragedy of this period. So this particular play was the finest tragedy of that time. Another playwright was Thomas Otway. He wrote Alcibiades, Don Carlos, The Orphan, and Venice Preserved. These are the plays of Thomas Otway. The Restoration comedy is also known as comedy of manners. Another term is comedy of manners, which we will see in detail in the next class. Sometimes certain points may be repeated there. These comedies expressed a reaction against Puritanism and the sexual repression it had attempted to enforce. I think we have a few words here on this slide which needs explanation. So, first let us deal with what is Puritanism. Actually, Puritanism is the belief of a group of English Protestants of late 16th and 17th centuries who regarded the reformation of the church under Elizabeth I as incomplete. So, there was a kind of reformation that was going on inside the church, and again some people were not very happy with that. That is one explanation of Puritanism. There is another aspect to that same movement. Is called censorious moral beliefs, especially about self-indulgence and sex. I think it is closely related to that. So that means there was a strict control or discipline or observation of purity, physical purity, and people started reacting to that. Like even today, I think we find that when a society is trying to impose a lot of rules regarding sexual behavior, people can react. That's what is happening in this particular period. Sexual repression means kind of restraint or inhibition of feelings or desire. So that's the meaning of sexual repression. That means you are supposed to control your sexual desires. You are not supposed to express it. So this comedy is, especially comedy of manners, was a kind of reaction against the existing Puritan behavior of the society. Then fashionable intrigues, sex, marriage and adultery were treated with cynicism, with worldly wit and a sense of the comedy of life. Again, we have got a few more words coming up here. Intrigue. Intrigue means actually plot or secret planning to harm somebody. Another word is conspiracy. In Malayalam we say Gudalojana, right? Yes. So fashionable here means what was prevailing at that particular time. Not that it was fashion, not in that sense, but especially during the time of kings and queens and all that, people inside used to plot against the king or try to dethrone him. So that's the meaning of intrigue. And all these things were treated with cynicism. Now, what is cynicism? Cynicism is actually belief that people are motivated purely by self-interest. That is one meaning of cynicism, but here I think it has a different meaning, that is doubt about the truth of something. That means people become rather skeptic with a lot of doubt. So marriage, sex, adultery, they were all treated with doubt. Or maybe they looked at all these things with a lot of humor. The characters in the plays no doubt owed much to the courtiers, the wits and the men about town, as well as to ladies of fashion, citizens, wives and country girls. So the characters for this comedy of manners were mostly the common people, the men on the street. Then we have the members of the aristocracy, the king, queen, the noblemen, the lords, which here means the scholars, ladies of fashion. Country girls mean here village girls. In English language, country means village. The Restoration comedy was shaped both by native and French influences. So, there was a lot of influence, especially from the French writers, other than the native English writers. It drew its inspiration from the native tradition, which had flourished before the closing of theatres in 1642. That means there was a great tradition established by the university wits as well as Shakespearean group. So, they also definitely influenced this comedy of manners. It was also influenced by continental writers, especially by Molière and Spaniard. Continental writers means European mostly, like France, Spain, Italy and all that. It reflected closely the dissolute court life of the period. Here, dissolute means over intelligent. That means the people of aristocracy, they had a lot of wealth, power, so they used to have a kind of enjoyable life, lavish life. So they spend a lot of money on luxury and hi-fi life. That's the meaning of dissolute court life. There was a community of spirit which led to an interest in French comedy. Here, community of spirit means actually the common man's interest. Especially, everybody wants to have a kind of life of enjoyment, pleasure. So, instead of always looking at the tragedy, they want to have something new. That's why people started looking up to French comedy. So, Molière gave English dramatists the brilliant ideas of plots and some fine examples of comic characterization. So, the English playwrights took a lot of inspiration, especially with regard to plots, the stories and ideas from this particular French dramatist like Molière. The comedy of manners is conspicuous for intellectual and refined tone. Conspicuous means here clearly visible. That means it was well known for intellectual and refined tone. That means they were dealing with the aristocracy, the high society. It is devoid of romantic passions and sentiments. So there was no place for sentiments and all or passions. The plays show a close and satirical observation of life and manners. So they were trying to make fun of their lifestyle, the aristocracies, the aristocracy. Satire means writing in order to ridicule or to make fun of. The comedy of manners recalls the works of Ben Jonson. Yes, so Ben Jonson is another great playwright of that time. It is realistic. So Ben Jonson's work is more realistic. The simple aim of this comedy is to show the manners of the upper ranks of society. So comedy of manners here means manners of the aristocracy, the high class people. That's why it is called as comedy of manners. Manners means actually lifestyle. That is another meaning of manners. They are shown with unemotional frankness. So they are trying to depict their life without much emotion. The aristocratic refined society which it represents or which it presents is fashionable. So they are definitely highly fashionable, this aristocratic society. It does expose follies means blunders, But these are the follies of refined gentlemen, high class people, and not of low characters, low class. Its setting is provided by the public parks, fashionable clubs, taverns, and drawing rooms of the aristocratic and the leisured classes of the time. So naturally, the scenes or settings are of public parks where these people come together, people of high society and all that. Then we have the clubs like saloons, which I already mentioned. Taverns mean pubs, or even chocolate houses we saw. And then the drawing rooms of the rich and famous people. Its main subject is the intimate relationship between men and women. So, the main subject is the gender relationship between male and female. The people of this period looked upon love as a purely personal matter and marriage as a social performance. So, they are trying to separate the religious aspect of marriage and love, because till then people saw marriage as a kind of sacred thing, but here they are trying to say it is just a kind of matter between two people, whether it is love or marriage, and the society has nothing to do with that. The writers of the Comedy of Manners dissected the complications of these relationships. Dissected means just like in a lab, cutting into pieces, trying to analyze in detail. The Restoration dramatists drew their characters and copied their situations from the life they saw around them. So, they were only trying to mirror the life of aristocratic people, reflecting their life that they saw around them, that is being realistic about the theme, not pure imagination. The Restoration dramatists were interested in wit and portrayal of manners rather than in the movement and progression of events. So, they are more interested in comedy, wit and portrayal of manners in an attempt to satire or ridicule them. They do not focus much on characterization, that you will see later. So, they employed a spatial rather than a temporal plot. That means it was not controlled by time, it was mostly the place. The place was more important, the situation was more important. That means the character was not actually evolving, because they are actually focusing on a particular event or incident rather than on the character. The loose knit pattern of such a plot was a definite advantage to them. So, the plot was very simple. They are only trying to focus on the lifestyle of people. So, it is not very complicated. It provided a better scope for the contrast and balance of characters. So, such kind of simple plot gave them better scope for contrasting and balancing of characters. Conflict and intrigues occupy an important place in the Restoration comedy. Conflict means the relation between two people, mostly based on love or marriage, and then intrigue, plotting or conspiracy. So, these were the two things that obsessed this Comedy of Manners, those who are writing such dramas. Here you have a scene. Now we come to sentimental comedy. Sentimental comedy is an 18th century dramatic genre which sprang up as a reaction to the immoral tone of English Restoration plays. So, actually, sentimental comedy comes after Restoration plays. It was a kind of reaction against the immoral tone of such kind of dramas. In sentimental comedies, middle class protagonists triumphantly overcome a series of moral trials. So here the hero or the protagonist is facing some kind of difficulties in his life, moral difficulties. So at the end he is succeeding or triumphing over that. So that is the theme of sentimental comedies, and it is mostly dealing with the middle class, not the high class people like aristocracy. These plays aim to produce tears rather than laughter, and reflected contemporary philosophical conceptions of humans as inherently good but capable of being led astray by bad people. So here the word sentimental comedy implies that it was meant for crying. So it was not just slapstick comedies of like the comedy of manners. They wanted the audience to cry, and it reflected the time of at that time when people believed that human beings are actually essentially good, but sometimes due to certain situations he becomes bad. So here inherently good means essentially inside every human being there is a good heart. By appealing to his noble sentiments, a man could be reformed and set back on the path of virtue. So this is the message. If you are appealing to the his senses, his sentiments, then that person could be changed and brought back to good life, a virtuous life. While the plays contained characters whose natures seemed overly virtuous and whose problems were too easily resolved, they were accepted by audiences as truthful representations of the human predicament. So most of the time the characters were pictured like two good people with a lot of good qualities, and their problems are also solved very easily, but still the audience accepted that because there was a kind of element of reality or realism in that. The characters in sentimental comedy are either strictly good or bad. Heroes have no faults or bad habits. Villains are thoroughly evil or morally degraded. So here you have a kind of clear-cut division between heroes and villains. That is, the heroes are too good and the villains are too bad. The author's purpose was to show the audience the innate goodness of people, and that through morality, people who have been led astray can find the path of righteousness. So that's what is said before. We can change human beings by showing them kindness. The plot usually centered on the domestic trials of middle class couples and included romantic love scenes. So domestic trials means the everyday problems that the family men find or family women find, and there is also some romantic love scenes in between. Their private woes are exhibited with much emotional stress intended to arouse the spectator's pity and suspense in advance of the approaching happy ending. So in their personal life they come across a lot of problems, worries, and they go through kind of a lot of emotional stress, and that brings out the pity or sympathy from the audience, and at the end of course it will end up in a happy ending. Lovers are often shown separated from each other by socio-economic factors at the beginning, but brought together in the end by a discovery about the identity of the lower class lover. So you find the lovers from two different classes. Maybe the girl is from a high class and the boy is from a lower class, just like in the Titanic movie. But actually, very often we think the movie Titanic is about romance. It is not actually. It only depicted the social condition of that time. There was a kind of divide between the low class and high class, where they could not even mingle. You find, even the ship, Titanic ship, you find two classes were there, where they were not allowed to enter the high class area. So that actually, the Titanic ship actually represented the society of that time, where you have a clear-cut division and separation between the low class and the high class. Plots also contained an element of mystery to be solved, and there was also an element of mystery. Verse was not used in order to create a closer illusion of reality. Here, verse means poetry, just like in other dramas which used verse. Here you find a kind of change in that. They are using prose, that dialogue, a common man's dialogue, and instead of verse, they started using prose. So that reflected more of reality. It was thought that rhyme would obscure the true meaning of the words and make the truth disappear. So if they are using verse or poetry, there should be rhyming and all that, rhyming words. So that can actually conceal or obscure, hide the true meaning of words and make the truth disappear. So while they started using prose, the common man's language, they were able to communicate more easily to the audience. The playwrights of this genre aimed to bring the audience to tears, not laughter. So the aim of the playwrights was not to make people laugh, but to cry, as the name sentimental comedy might suggest. So sentimental means bringing people to tears. They believed that noisy laughter inhibited the silent sympathy and thought of the audience. So these playwrights, they thought that if people started laughing out like that, they will lose the sympathy of the audience, especially to the hero or heroine. So their aim was to arouse sympathy or pity among the audience, which in turn will make them to cry. So that was the aim of the sentimental comedians. I think with that we come to the end of Restoration drama. So we meet again in the next class. Till then, it is goodbye.